in the Comox Valley here, all of you are on Indian land, Indigenous land. It's really owned by us. We have no treaty. And so there's no means for you to, in full conscience and clarity, say that this is your land.
I hope that got your attention, because every time I hear it, I get chills from the hard truth. I'm Zach. Welcome to the Ranger Cabin, and part 2 of my 3-part discussion interview with Wedlidi Speck, a hereditary chief from Alert Bay, British Columbia, and a friend of mine. Wedlidi is Kwakwaka'wakw, Nuuchanulth and E'iksan. He's the head chief of the Gixsam namima of the Kwaguł tribe. Wedlidi's a spiritual leader, a knowledge keeper of history, traditional protocols and practices, and a humble leader wherever he walks. Bit of warning, the first 5 minutes of this discussion is pretty dense knowledge being dropped about treaty and land rights issues in British Columbia. It's important but tricky if you're not familiar with BC history yet, so hang on tight, because it provides context for the rest of a very accessible discussion. Today, Wedlidi and I talk about some of the big differences between colonial and Indigenous cultures and the social structures in them. I hope you enjoy it. Leave your comments and share your new knowledge with your friends and family. Most importantly, keep your fire hot. I'm Zach Whyte. Welcome to the Ranger Cabin.
The way that I look at things is that this was an Indigenous country, right? Europeans came. Then we had Upper Lower Canada. We had the 1763 Royal Proclamation. It outlined, we'll say, how people could acquire Indigenous land, right? And that's where the concept of First Nations came from. So a treaty-making process set out and went across the country. Did probably a third of British Columbia. In the meantime, this was about, we'll say, acquiring Indigenous land and establishing a sense of place in Canada. And so the Hudson Bay Company, who landed on the West Coast prior to British Columbia joining Canada, needed to acquire land for coal, so they set out and established treaties on Vancouver Island, and so that initial relationship was one legal, and so it was contractual kind of thing. It's that where they acquired certain lands, and this is what we gave in return. Right?
Where was that?
That's Fort Rupert, Nanaimo, and Victoria. And so those treaties are well established with signatories. It's really clear, and so the understanding of ownership was never in question, and so what ends up happening is that as time goes on in the formation of Canada, we move from the Royal Proclamation to the 1867 B&E Act, right? And so in this new relationship with what would be the provinces, is that certain authorities were handed over to Canada from the provinces, and one of them was Indians, and land reserved for the Indians, and so therefore that became a federal responsibility, and so but we ended up with a new constitution, right? And so as a result of that, views toward Indigenous people began to change. British Columbia took a real shift in how they viewed Indigenous people. We moved from needing to acquire land by way of treaty to this imagined constitutional authority. In becoming a province, they automatically just acquired the land, which is illegal, right? It contravened international law, and so in any case, there was disputes around that from that time till Calder, which was the Nisga'a chief leader, who took the province to court and which eventually ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada. It was 1969, and so the Calder case, there was only, I think it was 6 or 7 rather, who sat to listen to the case, and 3 agreed with the province, and 3 agreed that title existed. The 7th agreed that title existed, but he wouldn't vote because he didn't feel that the Indigenous people got permission to sue the province. And so in this ruling, it became clear, we say, that the majority of the Supreme Court of Canada agreed that title in British Columbia existed because there's no treaty, right? And so that then paved the way, we say, for the first land claims policy in Canada. And so now the province and the feds and Indigenous people had to start looking at how they were going to settle the land dispute in British Columbia. And that was a pretty significant move at the time. Of course, fast forward, we've had other court cases. We've had the Delgamuukw case, and then we've had the Chilcotin case. And each time that we've gone to court, that definition of land and that definition of title is getting clearer and clearer. And clear that title exists in British Columbia. And so what that says to me is that there's a recognition that in the Comox Valley here, all of you are on Indian land, Indigenous land. It's really owned by us. We have no treaty here. And so there's no means for you to, in full conscience and clarity, say that this is your land, right? And so we need to settle that for all of us. You need to be able to say, as a citizen of British Columbia, that when you bought your property, that it belongs to you. Because right now it doesn't, in this court case view. And so when I look at that, we have the outstanding view that the province had when they joined Confederation, still here today, which is racist. It's stolen land, and they somehow in their racism have said that, no, we own it by the very nature of becoming a province. And so they can't shake that. And so the courts have had to reprimand them and to pave the way for treaty making to take place.
Are the courts supporting this now in a different way?
Well, I think what happens that the Chilcotin was the clearest of looking at, let's say, that title existence. And I think that you don't want the courts to settle this. It's not going to go good for you, as British Columbians, right? And so what it recognizes that the historical systems are recognized as owning traditional land, and so that part's really important. Then, we'll say, when we as a country adopt, we'll say in principle even, the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights, is that when you look at the document, it's an aspirational. We're not legally bound to it, but it's aspirational. It says that that's where we want to go, and that's how we're pursuing our understanding and our work toward Indigenous rights. And so when you look at this Indigenous rights, it comes back to what I call hereditary rights. Comes back to pre-colonial rights. None of that has anything to do with elected chief and councils or Indian Act formations, right? It's beyond that. And so I think what's really important is that people need to start recognizing hereditary families, cultural families, and begin to work toward finding a way that we can coexist together, right? And so when we're talking about racism, racism is in the core of our understanding, and so it's way easier for people to start designing ways in which we can be just like everybody else, right? And to be different is just terrifying for people, and so the idea of residential schools and the idea of assimilation, those policies are rooted in the very formation of this country. And,
can we call it cultural genocide? Well,
I was going to say that south of the border, they were doing that. They were hunting And
Yes.
we did that in the Beothics, right? We hunted the scalps, and we were wiping people out. And so we have had that experience here in Canada. And so by definition of the United Nations Declaration is that, when we're taking a look at assimilating people and taking their spirit of cultural spirit and spiritual spirit, all of that away, that's called genocide. And so part of that is that they weren't successful though, but they really worked hard.
But just.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was almost successful.
Yeah, and so, and people, I think when we're looking at this, is that how we walk as Canadians, the multicultural policy in Canada wasn't designed, to say, for us to recognize the cultures of other people. It was okay for you to dance your dance, but I expect you to be Canadian and whatever I decide that to be, right? And so there's this whole assimilation of ethnic groups in Canada as well. There's only two languages, right? And so it's either English or French. And so part of that is that up to the patriation of our latest constitution, the Canadian Constitution Act, is that there was no Section 35. I was involved in the politics of the day. And we sent people to England, to the United Nations. We sent them everywhere to embarrass the Crown and embarrass Canada, so that they would create Section 35. And after a lot of work and and protests, and we had a constitutional express that went from BC all the way to Ottawa. We did a lot of work on that, and as a result of it, we got Section 35, and they affirmed and recognized Aboriginal rights, right? And so what we say is that Constitution affirms title. It affirms that hereditary right. And I think that's really important. But people still can't get it, right? People still want to be owning our land and without having to be accountable for it, and benefiting off the benefits, and and making these accusations will say that that we're sponges off the government, we're wards of the government, and on and on and on it goes. And to me, that comes from a very sinister, mean-spirited place, from people, will say, who got very wealthy and very powerful off our backs, right? Every tree that they've taken from this territory, from the E'iksan territory and all the other territories, are trees that belong to us, right? And they've been doing that for a couple hundred years now.
And you don't get a cent.
We don't get a cent, except for in the fact to say that, in a pre-treaty kind of way, that, we get some monies, we'll say, to support a chief and council and with some infrastructure. But that's for reserves, eh? That's not for those hereditary people who still have territory outside the reserves.
You brought up forestry. I mean, forestry is a provincial jurisdiction, and money from for Indigenous peoples comes from the federal government. Mm-hmm. That's not even linked.
Not even linked, no. Yeah, and so I think when we're looking at the complexity of this is that when we look at the idea that this is Indigenous Canada, that we've got outstanding issues to settle, that would say we have to take a look at the idea of the impact of colonization. We talk about numbers of people in jail or in hospitals or commit suicide or things like that. When you break a person and when you rape their children, and when you do all of these things that are so horrible, we're talking about the depreciation of cultural self-esteem. And so when people are walking in the world that are really damaged and hurt, they don't have that sense of hope. They don't have that sense of positivity, right, and strength. And so that's what we're dealing with. I've been involved with a treatment center in Nanuus there for 25 years, and we offer an approach, that's based on modern and traditional methods of healing, And the idea being is that we help equip our people with the skills they need to make different choices. But we're dealing basically with the trauma of colonization. And so as people regain their strength and have some skills, it doesn't mean, we'll say, that a year program or 2-year program, that they have everything taken care of. They have to work every day. This is damaging work, right? Not work is damaging, but we're having to heal those things that caused great injury.
And we're human too. We need an ongoing structure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so with that, and so in saying all of that, when we're talking about this is what we're doing, and when I talk about settler work, right, there's a lot of different strategies that have been developed for non-Indigenous people. And when Unsettling the Settler is one approach, and that's a really good book for people to help navigate their way. There's another one we call White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and it's really about inviting non-Indigenous people to talk to non-Indigenous people about systemic racism, and to learn about it and challenge some of the assumptions and ideas that they have. And then the latest one that I really like, I've gone through it, and this one here is Me and White Supremacy. And what it does is that it dispels the notion that supremacy isn't somebody in a sheet burning a cross. White supremacy is the notion, it's an ideology that thinks that people are superior than others and begin to develop structures and systems that will hold that superiority in place, right?
It's a perfect system.
It's a perfect system. And so as a result of that, this particular book is a 28-day strategy of how to address that and how to navigate your way through it so that you can become, you can undo the supremacy that you inherited and that you continue to live and how these systems that are in place, cause those problems for us. And so it's pretty amazing stuff. And
in your own life, do you see people trying to undo?
Absolutely.
How does it look?
Well, I think in the place that I work with, the Ministry for Children and Family Development, I actually have been asked to lead the way for looking at systemic racism within the ministry and looking at ways that we can begin to undo that and to change the system so that the system can be more inclusive and more diverse and more responsive to the needs of those that we provide service to. And I think we've done some pretty amazing stuff. And then the fact that attention is now, really good attention has been given to language. Really good attention has been given, we'll say, to education. Really good attention, we'll say, has been given to entrepreneurship and business. There's so many things happening in this country right now that are helping us as Indigenous people, but it's also helping non-Indigenous people take a look at those successes and accomplishments, right? And we're starting to change it a little bit. We have a lot more allies than we had 15 years ago, and it's really exciting. We have people walking with us and doing some really creative things together, like we're doing here. And I think that's to me an example of where we can begin to make a change and make a difference, and do some pretty powerful stuff. Where in some cases, where I see racism, and blind spots are big for people. I constantly to this day, people will ask, you're leading the way, but you're working with Indigenous people. I said, no, actually I'm working for non-Indigenous people. Or we'll say when I worked for the John Howard Society, they never said this. But people that I would meet from outside the John Howard Society would say, you're providing counseling to Indigenous people. I said, no, I don't have any Indigenous clients. They're all non-Indigenous. They constantly are demeaning me, thinking that somehow I picked up my training in a remedial kind of way. And after a while, you just see it's humoring. But it's an example, we'll say, of that mindset that we're inferior, right? And I think that's really important to be aware of and to call it, Bill. Yeah.
Right. There is definitely a lot of mystery still to understanding the culture. And I'll give you just a really straightforward, simple example, which is the potlatch, which is viewed from the outside world as just a party in the winter. That's it. When really, the potlatch is the entire governing system of Indigenous peoples, and things don't happen unless there is a feast or a potlatch. That's how things are done. And just my point being that the access to the knowledge, there's a lot of mystery still. And I think people are struggling to find entry points. Even with, we see Indigenous fashion now coming into the mainstream. Is it okay for me to wear an Indigenous symbol if I'm not Indigenous? Is it, there's a lot of stuff to navigate here and I think, I have to think as an optimist, I do think people want to do right. People want to do the right thing. And even if they're being racist, I find people are like not knowing they're being racist, but they think they're doing the right thing, right? But also there's all these unwritten rules that I think we're all working together and trying to navigate through to find the right way to be able to be respectful in all places. I genuinely think people want that. I hope I'm not wrong. But a lot of that racism and fear comes from the non-understanding of how, I don't know how to navigate this space, so I'm going to just take a stance in ignorance. Yeah. Right?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, and I think it's around what landscape of consciousness we work from. And so if we're in a cultural landscape versus, we'll say, ordinary landscape, things are really seen differently. So if, for instance, if the premier is wearing Indigenous clothes, or we'll say people are non-Indigenous marketing, promoting themselves and selling, we'll say, Indigenous symbols, then you have to really think about what you're doing and think about what the statement is, right? And so it could signal on one hand that the premier is supporting Indigenous symbols and Indigenous culture. And it doesn't take much to say that, look, by the way, I'm wearing this to say that. When you are marketing, say, clothing and symbols on clothing, and saying that you're an Indigenous business when you're not, it says something that you're not obviously clear about your identity, or you're clear about your marketing strategy, or you're clear about your business, right? And so what you're doing is that you're actually, you're not lying, but you're manipulating the customer. And I don't think that's very fair. And it's not very proper. And so as to the question about cultural symbols, we have to be cautious as Indigenous people, and I'm talking from a cultural perspective, the landscape of culture, that we don't caricaturize our culture and our symbols, because what that does, it makes it trivial, and if we do it in a trivial way, it loses its potential and potency. And because if we invite you in and we want to put a blanket around you, and if you happen to be, we'll say, from a Thunderbird clan or a Whale clan or something that's really big, right? When we say that you're entitled to use that, it's usually done in ceremony. And so I don't see this happening when you're selling it. I see that you're putting a whole bunch of symbols out there and a whole bunch of, you're saying something, but I'm not sure what you're saying. Mm-hmm. There was a time, we'll say, when some of the earlier anthropologists and collectors came around, when a person would sing a song for him, and the guy gave him a handshake, some money. The chief said, "You don't own that anymore. You sold it. And if you gave them and you sold a mask, you don't have a right to that anymore. You sold it." And so that becomes a real challenge, right? It becomes a saying that, there's property is really important. And there's certain things we say that chiefs and families own that are done in a certain way. Like, I've watched, say, some of our younger people will say make ancestral mask with a butterfly on its head. Well, that is the Speck and Williams and Smith family crest. And so it's kind of like whoever bought that and put it in their house is not a Speck, is not a Williams, is not a Smith. It's not, so it becomes awkward, culturally really awkward. I went to Salmon House on the Hill about 5 years ago, maybe a little more. And it was a birthday party for, I think, one of my in-laws. And we were sitting there, and so my late father-in-law says to me, he says, "Boy, look behind you, Wedlidi, it's a beautiful mask." So I turned around and I saw this gigantic mask with a butterfly on its head. And that was my family crest. So I went over and I walked up to it and I looked at it and I said, "Man, this is our family crest. Who did this?" There's a little marker there, and the fellow was Métis. And I was going like, I don't understand. Who gave this person permission, to make this mask, right? And it kind of upset me, yeah. And so I went back again a couple of months after that, and it was gone. So I think, I don't know, it's like we just have to pay attention to those things. And ask why we do what we do, and and what are we sharing, and we're all learning and growing about it. But I think we need to help each other. Be clear about that, it's like a butterfly is a butterfly, right? And you look at this precious creature everybody sees it as a beautiful thing. And you apply a cultural expression to it, that's owned by the world. But if you put it on a mask, that's owned by us, right? And I think that when we're looking
and owned by your family,
yeah. So when we're looking at cultural pieces, we want to just be careful about what we communicate about it. Like when we talk about, we'll say there's certain things. And we dance with this all the time. If we're talking about hamatsa, like we did earlier, the hamatsa is winter. So those masks are winter. And if we take those masks and we put it in the summer, it's not for summer. I was told, by, probably about 15 elders, that when you're finished with them and you're putting it away after you do your ceremony, you tie the mouth shut. And then you blanket it. You keep it warm.
You put hemlock in the mouth.
Yeah, lots of things. Yeah. And so what you do is that you're taking care of business, right? And then you store it away. It's not to be shown. And so when we have that kind of care and that kind of respect, then we know the culture's in good shape. And so what you can do, there's a ceremony in summer you can have. It's called a Tame Hamatsa. And the Tame Hamatsa dances, but you don't do the Hamatsa cry. Mm. You don't go hop like that. Mm. That's not what you do, because you're not wild. Mm. You're tame. Mm. It's kind of like when making sure we say that when we're following the protocols that we do so thoroughly, and so. We're starting to change that. I'm starting to see the hamatsa being shown in the summertime, and I'm not sure how that's going to land in a spiritual sense.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, you've talked to me about this before, where it doesn't. They're not made. The ritual is not made for that season.
Yeah,
and so because it's out of alignment, it's not proper. Mm-hmm. But how do you feel about masks when you see them in the gallery? I mean, from a personal standpoint, how do you feel about, say, a mask that you would normally store and not show ever, except for in ceremony, being sold in a gallery.
Yeah, I have issue with that. I think part of it is that it goes back to, like our artists got to earn a living, but they've made art as their business. And I think there's certain things they can do, but there's certain things like if you're going to make it's a bird mask, every mask has a name, and so are you selling the name with it? And I think part of it is that are you selling the carcass of it? And so, what's happening with that? And there's no spirit attached to it. But I think if things are being sold, it should not be the mouth should not be open. There's certain rules, right? And really, it's summertime. I think there are certain things like we have screens that we show in the potlatch in the winter ceremony. Those are put away too. And so I think it's really important for us to really talk this out again, to say that, how much are we going to strengthen our culture or bring us back to that place, the genesis of what's important.
I'm seeing another disturbing trend, which is they'll take a mask or even a blanket and dance it and then sell it. And in having being danced, the price goes up astronomically, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in some cases. If it's a blanket, it could be hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Is that under the responsibility of the artist, or what are we doing there?
It's a responsibility of the chief. It goes back into the authority of the chief. He has the responsibility to make sure, we'll say, that the culture's been followed, that his house is taken care of. I'm always remembered of the late Jimmy Seaweed, who taught me about the symbolism of the big house, and he said to me this time, my dad was going to potlatch and we were standing outside. He said, "Son, you see that image on the outside of the house?" He said, "That's the image of the ancestor. That's your ancestor." He said, "That doorway, it's your mouth of your ancestor. You walk in and you'll see the backbone, you see the ribs." And he said, "The floor of the house, you see that fire? It's the soul of the house. It's like you're in heaven." And so when you walk in there, he's saying that it's like a cultural reset. You're going back to the beginning to learn the things that you need to learn. And he said something that I've thought about, and I haven't really talked much about, but he said that all these things that you have carved inside, when we talk about our names, and we have names that describe wealth on the body, that's it, right? And I've kind of I never really thought about that in terms of looking at its body, right? So it's the wealth on the body of the ancestor. And I said, oh shit, now I get it. And it's taken me quite a few years to get it. But when he talked about then the blanket that we wear is the house. So we put our house on and we dance our house, and it gives us strength. So when we go out and we do a speech outside the house, we're carrying our house with us. And so the idea that we sell our house, does that artist that comes from that family have the permission from the chief to do that? Because they're selling your house, right? And I don't understand that.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the, it's coming back, which is so exciting. And I've gone down the rabbit hole of Chilkat weaving, and the weavers doing the work that I've been following anyways have. It's almost a creed or a life they have taken as almost like a priest would take on, or a chief would take on. To become a weaver is to weave spirit. And so if weavings are done, and I'll just use it as an example, if weavings are done, if it's done properly and done through that process, those weavers would never put a design into the blanket that would carry a house or carry it. It would be only designs that would be able to be shared openly. much like I see Kumugwai has, dances, songs that can be openly shared.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting point to help people understand that there's a different world that is secret and cultural and very important to each family and each person. And then there are designs that can be shared, like you say. Everyone sees a butterfly, but if you apply the butterfly to the blanket or to the mask, that would be property.
Yeah. There's like the cornerstone or one of the foundational pieces to our big house and the protocols is that people show up with their house, right? And when people show up with their house, they show up with their strength. And some of us will say who have titles in different houses, it's our responsibility to the host to let them know where we're coming from. So, like the speaker will ask me, what name using tonight, Wedlidi, right? And so if I say Kwakaka'wakw, then I'm coming from the Kwaguł. If I'm doing a name, we'll say like Kwakaka'wakw, I'm coming from the Tlawachis, right? If I say that I'm going to use Mamallu suit, I'm coming from the Nuuchanulth and E'iksan, right? And so if I'm going Histokwa, I'm coming from the Nuuchanulth. So these are the different things. So it's important for me to let that person know, because what it does, it affects, we'll say, the order of speaking, and so if I come from, if I use the name Mamallu suit, then I'm near the end of all the speeches, but that's okay, right?
Hey, that's great in a political situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, and so part of it is that when we have this obligation, because then if I'm coming from there, I need to wear a blanket that's from that house.
Right.
And so that part's really important. And so...
so with regalia, if you were doing a dance, you would wear that, you would be representing that house and that dance, and then possibly change a blanket?
Possibly.
Yes.
But I wouldn't, there's no such thing as an androgynous blanket, because even the tree of life is owned by families, right?
Yes.
They have rights to it. And so if you have, like in some families, what they'll do is they'll put mother and father side on the blanket, so you have two. But usually that was really for not everybody. That was the nobility of the family. So you knew, would say that the noble ones, like the eldest Ge'i, they call them the eldest of the family. They showing their mother and father side. They have special status, and I think that's important to know. There's some subtleties there. Not everybody could wear certain things. There is the idea that the Chilkat blanket, for instance, the origin of that, is really that only chiefs wore them. And now we see today in the culturalization of the families, everybody wears them. But I think in terms of...
it's because they're pretty rad.
Well, some think so, yeah. I think part of me is when I look at that, I really think that's great that they have that. And I think that when I look at the blankets of the Helkaminan people, I think it's beautiful. When I think about, we'll say, the cedar blankets of the Salish from Sliammon and here, I think that's beautiful. Right?
Gorgeous. I
think the elected chief has a garment arrangement I quite like. I think that's beautiful. And so when, I've talked to my stepsister about making me one that is wool, because it's like my Mamallu suit is to do with a mountain goat.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I really like that idea.
Oh, you do you?
Yeah, I do.
Bring your wallet.
yeah. My stepsister, no.
Yeah.
yeah. But, I really like the way, it's Deb Sparrow.
Okay.
Yeah, and Deb has got a really wonderful spirit about her, and she's very culturally connected.
That's important to you.
That's really important to me, that when I know when she's weaving, that she's got love and she's got connection, and that she's working with spirit. And I know when you put that on, I have that around me. It's like some of the family members here who make blankets. They have such love in their heart that, when you're putting that blanket on, it's really special.
And the weaver and the blanket maker channels all the ancestors into that blanket. So when you put it on, it's incredibly powerful.
It's incredibly powerful. Yeah, and there were times, say, when we were first starting out, like way back when, like we're talking 75, 76, we wanted to do it ourselves, right? So we were making this, and every button meant something, and so it was great. Like, I mean, it wasn't the best job, but it was filled with love, right?
Right.
And everybody had a vest, and and it was really cool, and you look at it and saying that we've really come a long way.
Well, that's what's incredible about it. Now we're seeing kids come up and they're watching it.
Yep.
And it's normal, like it's becoming a normal thing when it's time for them to learn. Yeah. They've already had a decade of seeing it.
Exactly.
And so it's only going to get better and better and better.
Well, and what I'm really happy to say that, like I had 5 children, and I've got 5 grandchildren with a 6th one on its way. It'll be that child, a boy.
Congratulations.
Will be born in February. And so what I'm really happy to say that, my children did not know day school, did not know residential school. What they know is a father who leans in, who loves them. I'm there, right? And my grandchildren know that. And when I think about that, is like when we talk about how we're restoring and how we're healing, that they look forward to seeing me, and I think that to me is, there's no better gift in the world that you can give someone other than reciprocal love, right? And I think that's, we win, we win. And, and every day we say that I can get up and I can say that, look, I'm happy to be me. We win.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, identity, culture, and rights are the significant cornerstones of any culture. And I think part of, like, when I think about identity, it's about self-concept, it's about knowing that I'm Kwakwaka'wakw, Nuuchanulth, I'm Salish, and no one can take that away from me. Not even my own people. I'm solid with it. And then we'll say the idea of self-discipline, the idea of self-disciple, that it's my lifelong learning. I'm never going to be a master because my humility says that God has so much to learn, right? Or self-acceptance, that I'm not that person, we'll say, who they tortured in school. That I have certain things I'm still working through. There's lots of pain there yet. But I tell you, the majority of the time, I'm really happy to be me. And I really, really love myself, and I love the world, right? And then we'll say the self-determination part, I get up and I have the courage to do stuff, and I model that courage. I take risks, when I try a song or I try a new dance or, I get up and give a speech or things like that. It's like I want to model that. There was a time where I never did that before. There's a time, we'll say, when the generation above me, like my dad and them, it was illegal. They weren't allowed to speak their language. They were punished. And my generation were bridge builders, and the next generation, they've jumped into it, and the next generation, the kids are almost fluent, right? And they sing the songs. It's like their courage. And it's like, this one guy locally did a video and he talked about the kids being the ones who will restore the order back again. And what I said to him privately, I said, well, you really need to understand, I said, is that my generation built the bridge, right? They're the ones that made the decision to reach back. And the next generation were the ones that began to really be awkward about how that was going to look. but we're willing to do it. And this next generation now is the safety in it, because we've reconciled that. And I said, so it's not like, it's never black and white, that there's a progressive piece here, and that it's taken, we'll say, my relationship to my dad, it's taken a relationship to my brother and I and my family, it's a relationship to my kids and now their kids, to begin to draw a line to say that, where we came from, where we are now, where we can go, right? And those are the really important pieces in our restorative aspect of our culture and ourselves, right? So when I think about identity, culture, and our rights, the hardest one is the rights, because we're having to deal with family members who are really entrenched in elections and
bloodlines and Indian Act.
Indian
and,
Act.
Yeah,
and that's the challenge. But that's the work we need to do.
But what's impressive, like you said, is that the new generation coming up is full steam ahead. That we're still in a generation where you're having to work and get people to accept who they are, and then maybe take a seat and take the vow of moving forward with the culture as well. So like the work that you're doing now as a community, for example, the seat chiefs. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like where that's at and why, that's exciting work as well.
Well, I think, the really important part, I'm so happy to be alive right now. It's about reclaiming.
Me too.
Reclaiming our place in the world, and offering an opportunity to individuals, families, that they too can. And Jesse Moran and I, and the help of many others, we've created a pathway where our cultural families can step in and do their work together. And, we've come to a place where we actually have now seeded the idea that there's Puntledge, E'iksan, and Comox. And in the Comox, there's two tribes. There's the Satlut and Sasita. But there's many houses here. And so with that, I'm excited about people coming together to begin to talk about their stories, and their rights and their identity. And we're not doing it fast enough as far as I'm concerned, but we're doing it. And I think as we step, the more we move forward, I think it's important for us to be mindful and cautious, and that we feel good about what we're doing. And I'm also doing the same work with the Likwukta young people, the young chiefs. So there's about 16 to 20 of us up there. And so that part's really important, because when people are beginning to be seated up there, families are, growing back into their cultural sense of self. And we had an event recently with Chief Dan Billy, who he was seated, and I think it's so exciting. And we got a few more to do, and I think that part's like amazing, right?
It's really hard with COVID, I imagine.
It's really
right?
hard. Yeah, we did it up there in COVID, but it was spaced, and we did it by family bubbles, and it actually with the chiefs, and it worked really well.
Likwukta, am I pronouncing that right?
Likwukta, yeah.
Likwukta. Yeah. They're a warring tribe?
Can I be really frank with you?
Yes.
I think they got a bad rap.
Yeah.
My sense is that when I'm talking about the Likwukta, is that we have to also talk about the Comox. And so prior to, in history, we were known as Satlut. In 81, I was talking with Mary Clifton, and she said, we're all Satlut. And Satlut originates from a clan named Satlut, and an answer by the name of Saltkum. So Satlut and Saltum go together. And so she referred to the tribe as real Satlut. And then there's the confederacy of tribes who call themselves Satlut. And so there's 16 tribes altogether. And so what happened in some period of time, one particular chief, he gave potlatches against a group, and he became the head of the Sasitla. And then the Sasitla won a potlatch against, say, the Satlut, and they became the head of the Confederacy, the alliance.
Right.
And so he gave another potlatch, big potlatch, and he changed the name from Satlut to Comox. And so only 5 agreed with him. And so those 5 became known as the 5 Whalehouse tribes. The rest of them aligned, with the Likwukta.
Ah.
And so the ones that joined the head clan of the Likwukta, we had status in it, being E'iksan, because they were our family. And so the Hachamatsis, they actually became a part of the group. And then we'll say we aligned with them. We maintained their independence as E'iksan, but we aligned. We had noble standing in names in the head clan of the Ualatsima, the Salmon River people. And then the Campbell River, the Wiwakam, they had a group called Komenoks, who was Salish Satlut, and they became a part of it. They infused in, they became really a part of it. And Tatapus, they also became part of them. And then you start looking at the affiliations with the Likwukta, you realize that they were really close and they were all intermarried. They were friends.
Of course.
Yeah. And so what ended up happening is that as time went on, the Likwukta did go to war with the Salish, and they were beaten badly in Maple Bay, and the survivors made their way north. But they went to our family, the E'iksan, for safe harbor. So we brought them in. Another E'iksan chief, Gixsam, his name was, he started killing them. And so a word was sent by our family to the Likwukta to let them know this was going on. And so when the Likwukta came down with the full force of their power, they annihilated those people that were killing the Likwukta, and only our group survived.
Yes.
And so we went to a place called Kwaguł, which is near a Ripple Rock, and that's where we had safe harbor. But the 5 tribes of the Comox would taunt our family, and it was really unsafe for us. It wasn't because of the Likwukta that we went to Puntledge, it was because of the 5 tribes. And so when we went down, we stayed with the Hiquitin and with the Kwayamin and the Suksan survivors, and that's where we were. And that was about 1830, 1840.
Yes. It was pre-smallpox, I believe.
Yeah, way pre. And then the Likwukta started going after the 5 tribes of the Comox, and they were pushed south. But they're not to be confused with the E'iksan. And so when they came south and they landed where they are now, and the Puntledge went to war with them, and there were losses on both sides, right? It only stands to reason that E'iksan were with them when they were fighting, because they were living in the same village. And so they end up with the smallpox, end up in a peaceful way. And so they became known as Comox, and there was Puntledge and E'iksan. There were 3 tribes here in 1876. And by 1881, rather, the E'iksan were just rolled into the Puntledge, and they were considered Puntledge at that time. Yeah. So when we're looking at the Comox, Vowel, who was an Indian agent at the time, he began to say that, well, because I can, I'm going to call all the 3 tribes Comox.
Right.
And I believe he did that to disconnect the Puntledge from their territory as a part of the assimilation process.
Right.
and so to me that was big. So when I look at the idea of the Likwukta, the only ones they were fighting with was actually the 5 tribes of the Comox. They weren't fighting with the E'iksan as we know them. They were fighting with Gixsam because the fool was trying to kill them, you know, and so. But they continued their relationship, and from that time to currently, the E'iksan and the Likwukta the Kome-Nooks until recent times, Tatpus. All those groups were good friends with the Likwakta. There was no fighting between them. The only fighting they had was between the 5 tribes of the whale house.
Right.
Yeah.
And the whale house still exists. That's something you're trying to bring back, yeah?
Well, we're trying to bring it back, but we haven't talked about the big conversation yet. What are we going to call it? Right?
Right.
And so do we call it Puntledge Whale House? Do we call it simply the Whale House? I, for one, will not support it being Comox Whale House. Because it's like we're not Comox, and we don't have a good history with Comox. But what we do is we have a history of the Whale House. We were Satlut before we were known independently as E'iksan.
What about Satlut?
I love that. Yeah.
What if it was just that?
Yeah. Yeah. Be perfect. Satlut Whale House.
Seems pretty universal.
Yeah. Well, it would be returned to pre-Comox days.
Right.
Yeah. And I think part of what's really important, we'll say, is to correct things. Like I think we need to have this territory renamed. It's Comox. It's Puntledge. And we need to honor the ancestors of the Puntledge. Otherwise, we are colonizing, right? And like when we're here, is that our humility says that this is Puntledge territory. We have arrangements where we own some of it now, because there was a time, we'll say,
as E'iksan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because it was carved up. The territory was carved up between us because we all live here now. But I don't know where that document is. I just have reference to it. And so I do know, we'll say that the Frank family and our family went to Heliwell Park area. There's a fishing village there, and things like that. So, but I do know, we'll say that when our people moved south, that Sassawan is where we were, and that's Point Homeshire. This is the dividing line, according to the stories that were told to Franz Boas in 1886, right? And so from here to south to Qualicum is where the Puntledge had their territories.
Is it Puntledge or Pentlatch?
Pentlatch.
So what is? Yeah. What do we call it?
I think what it is that I really want to talk to Carrie and to Rob and to Bruce.
These are the Eagle Chiefs?
Yes, and to say, what do you want to call it? So, when I look at all the different social scientists, we call them, they all have a different way of saying it. And so, but the most common is Pentlatch, with a little E and a little dash there, Pentlatch. And
so it's another one, third.
Yeah, it's like there's something like 4 or 5.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll show it to you one day.
Yeah,
there's just a list, and so everybody who was doing a study had a different hearing, and most of us agree with say that the affiliation between the Puntledge and the Kwakwaka'wakw and Kwakwaka'wakw was really apparent. The last one to speak Puntledge was Joe Nimnim, who also spoke Kwakwaka'wakw, who also spoke Comox, right? And so people don't understand this, but Nimnim's father was Likwakta. So he was half Likwakta, so, when you study their words, like they have the yadan, they have the rattle.
Yes.
You have lots of names that they use that are Kwakwaka'wakw. And so, but the problem with how we pronounce things today is that you have to understand what the word is, and then and look at how we pronounce it. See, E'iksan, is spelled E'iksan, but it's E'iksan.
Yes.
So Ik is good, and the word actually meant good weather or sun in human form. So the literal translation is good weather. But the metaphorical translation is sun in human form, because that's what good weather connects to, right? And it's interesting how language goes.
The language, I've been diving into Kwakwaka'wakw a little bit and understanding the roots and the intricacy of it, and it's a fascinating language. Yep. I've studied other languages. Kwakwaka'wakw is very special in its utility, combining different words, are you making a fire inside or are you making it outside?
Yeah.
Or are you making it, and there would be a different prefix or
yeah. Well, and I think we can like make it sensational because we just said that in English.
Right.
Right. So as a descriptive language, it's helping us say that, look, what are you going to do? Are you going to get in your car and go down the road to Cumberland? Right. And I think part of it is that what I really challenged people, and that was about 75. In 1975, I said, I don't speak the language, but I want to learn it. But don't tell me it's a tree. Los does not mean tree. And that's what reaches up, and it's a relational language.
It's that what teaches up is the translation. Teach
me that. And so it's kind of like when I would I went and I asked Bill Cramner. We had the elders in the big house one day in Alert Bay. And so what I said is that, what does Kwakwaka'wakw really mean? Right? Tell me, what does it really mean? So Bill went over and he actually talked with the elders, and they came back. And he said, the best way I could describe what they're saying is that I want to share breath and spirit together.
Dang.
Yeah. So as a relational language, right?
Yes.
And then halakisla, which means it makes more sense because it's my breath, right? Goes with you. It has to do with breath, hase. And so when you look at it, then you're going to have, depending on the person who's doing the analysis, level of consciousness you're in.
Yes.
If you're a 110 thinker or a 220 or 440 thinker, then, like this electricity type consciousness is going to be like a toaster. It's practical. And in that way, when Katie Adams, a Bumble, says to me, Nuuchanulth, it means one with heaven, the air, the land, the sea, and everything in it. Well, the 110 thinker says there's no oneness in that word. Right? So it can't be right. And I'm looking at this 88-year-old woman who just taught me something, saying that, I don't think so. I think it's more you. And so it set me off asking other Kwakwaka'wakw speakers, what does that mean to you? And this one guy was close. He said, one with the land and the sea that I own. So his level of consciousness was about property. And her 88-year-old consciousness was about relationship. So it depends on where you're at, right? And so that's what I mean about a literal and a metaphorical definition. And so when we talk about, when Bobby Joseph, Namayut, when he describes that, he has this really beautiful inclusive relational way of describing it that's really magical. And then
and that means we are all one.
We're all one, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And when you do that, it's like Namayut. It's like if I was to say yo Namayut, like we're connected. But I'm also in the context saying that we're family. Right? And I don't go and say we're namima, because that's the name. We're from one source. We're one together, and namu, or we're friends, or one, and things like that, and it's like, I think when we look at language and learning it, it's really important that we don't lose the metaphor, and that we really make sure that that's what we preserve, because it's being relational. It's going to help us, right? Gixsam is a name that we have of the one who walks across the universe. It's the all-seeing person. So what about the concept of being a receptacle of seeing? That was important. Because when we think about the idea of being receptacles of things, like you can be a receptacle of story, a receptacle of language, a receptacle of metaphor. We hold that like a container. And that part's really important. And so when we look at it that way, it's like, it's pretty amazing.
And if you're a receptacle and then a word like Kwakwaka'wakw, then it's almost an emptying or a transition or a transference of that energy and that knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredibly powerful. I mean, a way of learning the language, trying to learn the language through, because it's not written, it's oral. And so learning the language through action or through ritual or from the ground up, I find is a more perhaps powerful way to understand the context of the words, because it is a completely different, it feels to me completely different than English language, for example.
Well, yeah, and and the thing is that with the ear that I have, sometimes we'll say I don't hear it the right way, and so I have to, if it's a new word or a new concept, I have to be really careful about that, because I'll say it as I hear it, but I haven't heard it the right way, right? So there's little subtleties in the word itself, and I think that's really important to be humble about, right? And because my father used to tell me about things, and he had words that other chiefs didn't understand. And one similar to it was like Astana or something. Yeah. It's to do with giving away. And so the idea that when you give your gifts away, you can't touch it. You can't, you've let it go. It belongs to somebody else now.
Your hands are off of it.
Your hands are off of it. And he said, like, when people touch it, they walk around like this. And he's holding his fingers out like that, like he can't let it go. and what an example would be is that if someone came up and said, "Oh, that picture I gave to you," and they're still hanging on to that picture, right?
Got you. Okay.
Yeah. And so it's like that you haven't let it go. You can't let it go. I have to be associated with your success. Right?
Yes.
And it's because of me that you're this way, and you're kind of going like, but that explains it. And so he told me once, he says to his son, he said, when this dance comes out, don't go chase the money. Money's going to be thrown on the floor. Don't touch that money. And then he told me, don't forget to teach your kids that. Don't touch that money. And so I would tell the kids that this one dance is coming out. I sit on your hands if you want to get up. Don't touch that money. And I'll explain to you later. And so what he wanted us to do is to feel that restraint. But the dance itself was when they throw it the money and people run for it, you ask the question is, why do these kids have to run and grab things? Where's the taming of the cannibalism, right? Where's that taming of the want and the need?
And the hunger.
The hunger. And so it became a really powerful teaching. It was actually demonstrated in not the Hamata dance. It was in what we call the Kwakwaka'wakw dance. Mm-hmm. It's like fascinating.
I love the Kwakwaka'wakw.
I know. But it's really fascinating. And so when we look at that, these concepts that connected to words or language, right? Because I say that language is a means to translate thought, right? And so we have this thought, and it's like, I don't know how many times I've shared Ken Bloomfield's teaching to me when he said to me one day, he said, Wedlidi, you're an Aquarian. You're the sign of water bearer. He said, water is like electricity, 110, 220, 440, and the unlimited source. And he said, so your consciousness will be like that if you pursue the direction you're going. And he said, really important. He said, like some people are like a toaster. You plug them in and it's functional. And other times it's like a stove. We have different things that you can produce. And other things we'll say that are bigger that need a transformer that translate. So he says that all of these, he said, when you're 440 working with a 110, you're going to need something because they're not even on the same consciousness path. And so that's where parables of stories came in. He said that's why Christ in them was so successful. And he said that, so think about that in terms of consciousness. So when I think about that, I think about language in the same way. Is that what we're doing right now is that we're going down to the beach. We're looking at a stone. We're looking at a carved stone. We're doing things that are 110. And for some reason, we need to do that. But it's really important for us to do the 220 and also do the 440. And my urgency thought is that we need to do the 220 and 440 now, because the concepts are there's a potential of losing them.
Yeah, there's not many people.
No, very not. And so I've been given the gift, of talking with old people, and, like the idea of the symbolism of the house. That was never talked about before, right? And, and people are looking at me who are old people now, and difference of them between an elder is that old people now who don't have the concept, and they look at me and go like, that's weird, because they don't have that story.
Yes.
They've lost that story in their family and in their community. And so it's like, those are really important concepts. Like we need to, it's a relational concept, right? And, some really beautiful words, like sanala, to be whole. It says to me that there's times where we aren't whole. And there's times we'll say that when you do our healing work, that we arrive at a place where we have the sense of wholeness. And so it says that we have the means to arrive at that wholeness, which is beautiful.
It's almost forgiving to not be whole.
Yeah.
Which I think we carry a lot of guilt in our society to be chasing that and feeling less than if we aren't whole.
Yeah. There's a group in Alert Bay who are working with UBC around that concept of wholeness. And they call themselves Sanala. And, and I love it.
It's a beautiful word.
It's a beautiful word. I just love the concept of it, right? And, and I like, one of the things that I really like was the idea namatla. And that was one of the words that I heard as namala. I didn't hear the namatla.
Yes.
Tla, And so for a long time it was namala, namala, namala. And somebody said, oh, by the way, son, think about it. It's this way. I went, oh, okay, cool. But I'm aware that it has to do with my hearing. And then, because once you learn it, you know it forever. Right. And the beauty of it is it's like the cultural lens in which we look through. If I have oneness on my face, it's in my head, it's in my eyes, it's in my speech, it's in my hearing. And, and that's a beautiful piece, right?
Do you know what else, though? It's in your humility.
Yeah. Yeah.
To accept that.
Yeah. That's very cool.
Damn straight.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's really something, eh? Just like you learn these lessons and, and they're just like beautiful. My late uncle, Jim, I used to work with him in logging. And there were some times we'll say I was trying to reconcile, my relationship to the practice of stripping mountains, and falling and, logging and all this stuff. And so sometimes I get a little cranky and angry and, and he said, whatever question you have, whatever problem that you have, and you need to ask, and you don't know, ask. He said, because once you learn, once you know, you'll know it forever. And I just thank him for that. It was just an amazing little teaching, but it's one in which if you don't know, ask. That's how you learn. You get to know, right? And so I asked a million questions, when I was learning about the culture, and and I had to deal with the idea that my own addiction culture was around being a perfect person, perfection, having to know I have all the answers. And when I started to realize that I don't have all the answers and it's getting in the way of my learning, that's the beginning place of learning how to be humble, right? Is you're admitting that you don't know.
Especially given the title of elder or carrying this position of elder where you are you're the final say.
Yeah.
And that is a monstrous responsibility.
Yeah. Well, one of the gifts that I received from the old man Bill, I received so many from him, but another one that was really important. He said, I don't know that one. He says, you need to talk to my brother. Right? It was just like, okay, so it arranged to go and visit his brother Sam, and his brother told me, and it was like I told him, I'm trying to learn about my culture and my relationships with people, and he said, oh, son, that's so nice. He said, you want to know who your family are? And he said, well, we're related, he said, And he said, I want to tell you a story about they always just say grandmother, but it was my great-grandmother great-great-grandmother. And he said, when she came to our people, she's from our people, and she was kind of half Nuuchanulth and half Numgis. And he said she had a really strong Nuuchanulth accent, West Coast accent. People used to tease her all the time. He said my grandfather stood on one side of her and this other chief on the other side of her. And he said that they had coppers in their hands. And he called all the village together. And he said, you've been really teasing our relative. And if you continue to do that, we're going to break these coppers on you. It stops now. She's our family. Right? Because when you shame her, you're shaming us. And then we're all in shame. And it stopped. And it was phenomenal. And so what we did is that we had a feast, and fast forward in time, when I was stood in as the chief for the family, is that we put my Uncle Edwin on one side and myself on the other side. And every child in that feast stood in between us, and we gave that child a name. And what we wanted people to know was saying that they have chiefs with them, right? That these children need to know was say that we're always going to be with them. We'll always be beside them, things like that. It was phenomenal. It was a beautiful experience. So hearing that story really helped with that. And, and so in Bill's humility, he sent me to his brother, and his brother told me this really amazing story that actually turned into being a part of a performance, a part of how we did our business. It's very cool.
And that was fairly recent.
Yeah, that was about now 10 years ago more, Yeah, and so I think that was exciting.
How did you find those children change?
They were,
did it changed them, obviously?
Oh yeah. Well, we did the naming and the feast, and then we gave the potlatch about 4 years later. And when I tell you that potlatch radically changed my mind about lots of things. When those children danced and how they came alive, like they had names, they danced, and their confidence and their spirit was so amazing that it's why our ancestors did what they did, right? So that those kids will know where they come from. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wedlidi, you're a really special person in my life.
There we go.
And you're an incredible soul, and I really appreciate all the work you do in the community, and I appreciate you in my life so much. And when we spend time together and share ideas and share conversation, I heal inside.
Awesome.
And I look so forward to many, many more discussions, as I know we'll have, because we go down the rabbit hole pretty far on many topics.
Yeah.
And I just think the work that you're doing in the community is so important for the future generations, and I mean that from all sides. Mm-hmm. You come at your work with such a humility and such a power. Mm-hmm. And I think it's rooted in the right place, and I hope you can always find that place for yourself when you come forward. And I just want to say, you're a very important person in my life.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you being here and doing the work you do as well. I think that's both ways. And I think that there's a great opportunity for us to help. Like we're about helping people.
Yes,
we're about helping people learn. And what a great way to do it. It's just like, if this was around, we'll say when I was really young, it would be like, wow, and we do that. Hey, we can get really creative with stuff.
I think now more than ever is a time for people to share, and the access is simple.
Yeah.
Right? Hit record.
Exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, well, I really enjoy this. What I say when I'm helping and mentoring is that I feel really honored to be in and the role of a mentor, it's almost like a position, like a responsibility. And when you do, you just feel good, like I expect nothing in return. It's a gift, right? And when you do that, it's like, I get excited because the wisdom that came through these really amazing people have now passed on. Like I think about Katie, I think about Jimmy Seaweed or J.J. Wallace, and there's so many elders that passed on wisdom and their stories. I want to share that, right? Sometime I'll tell you about a Bumble story about Kwaguł, the one who came to make things right. The story was say of the chiefs and how they own beaches of J.J. Wallace, right? Things like that. There's so many. Or all the different teachings I received from Jimmy Seaweed about he had Cecil Dawson paint his mural of all the houses in Village Island. And so when we got together, he taught me about who lived in what house, what their crests were, who they were, and you just saw this story of his tribe and his people come alive. It's beautiful. And each one of those experiences began to shape the way I saw things. Because what I learned in that was that our social organization was so well thought out, that our origin as a tribe was so methodical.
It had thousands of years to evolve.
Yeah, it did. It's fascinating. Yeah. And people celebrated together, and remind me to sing a song and tell you the story of my great-grandfather, Chief Hereditary, when he wanted to have people think about coming together and having discourse. And how important that is to do it in a real good cultural way, and the way Jimmy described that to me, I will remember that forever, and it's beautiful, and there's so many things that these building blocks of culture that make sense, right? Or was say his teaching, he was with J.J. Wallace, he was with Alvin Alford, and I think he was with Harry Sue, but talking about the tribes who went to Night Inlet, and how they witnessed the owners of the territory give a feast, and then was say open up the fishery, and it was telling me, he would say that they did that because they just let people know they were the owners, right? And but they were also modeling to others how they wanted them to do it. It's fascinating. So the mentorship is just so profound, right? And or would say, when my grandmother, she was telling me the story of my grandfather, my dad's dad, and he said that one day the Kwaguł came in, and they couldn't land on the beach, and so all the other people in the village were assembling on the bank. But my grandfather held back and held back and held back. And she said that he just rocked back and forth and just waited. He had a couple of little whiskers on his chin. He said he would pull at them. And she would go, he said, yeah. He said, how come you're not going in to see what they want? And finally he said, well, this is when you let people know who the chief is. He said, it's not being bragging, but it's like they just get that you're the chief, right?
Of course.
And so when he got up and he would go and he would acknowledge them, and they would let let my grandfather know what they were there for. And then he said, well, now you can put your canoes on the beach and you can come up and we'll have a meal. And it was that idea that our sovereignty was stated. The respect for the chief was stated. And once he expressed his hosting and his approval, other chiefs in the village could speak. It was so orderly. It's so amazing, right? And then you be a host. Right? Yeah.
Are we gonna get back there?
Yeah. We'll go back to that kind of those sort of stories. There's lots to tell yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Cool.
Thanks again.
Thank you, man.
Thanks so much for listening to part 2 of my 3-part episode series with Hereditary Chief Wedlidi Speck. Please share and discuss these issues with your friends, your family, and your coworkers. In our next discussion, we dive into the potlatch system from a personal perspective. Thanks for listening at The Ranger Cabin on social media platforms. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. I'm Zach Whyte. Keep your fire hot.